Today I want to take you through some different tools we have inside Affinity on the left side so you can know a little bit about what exactly you can do inside Affinity. So inside Affinity, I picked this photo of a cow because I thought that kind of seems like my country, but then I saw the mountains in the background and that's not really something we have here. So it's just a picture of a cow all of a sudden. Inside this program, we're going to take a look at the different tools we have on the left side. As you can see, we have a bunch of tools inside pixel mode. And we do have different workspaces like Vector Studio and Layout and Color Grading and all the different studios we can pick up here. But I just want to focus on the pixel related tools for now, since it is quite a long video if we're going to take all the tools inside Affinity. But we will go through the tools and I'll show you and demonstrate what exactly they do. And then you can just sort of play around with the settings for each tool to get the perfect selection or something else. So the first tool that you're going to see here is something called the Move tool. And this is a very basic tool that you probably know how to use by now, which is just how to move around images. You can drag and you can just move it around. You can resize the image, we can do different things. But one thing I do want to point out here is that when you pick a tool, in some cases, if you have this little arrow at the corner, means that when you click the tool, you do actually get additional options inside this sub menu, as I would call it, which has tools that are related to that original tool. So for example, this was moving around things. So if I were to pick the one below, this is also moving around things, but in a different way. So just to know that if you see this little arrow here, you can click it, and then there's going to be like related tools that do it in a slightly different way, at least something similar in a slightly different way. But if we were to take a look at the first one up here, you can see the second tool inside the same menu is called Perspective Tool. So if I go inside my photo, you'll notice that if I drag the corner, all of a sudden we're not really resizing the image, but instead we're changing the perspective. So if you have to fit this inside a computer monitor, let's say you have a photo and then you have to like paste another photo inside that photo, which is something that has to be on a computer monitor or a TV screen, then you can just kind of fit this into the corner of that TV screen. Now we do also have another tool, which is called Mesh Warp Tool. I almost said it wrong there. So if you take this one and go in, you can see that now we're not really changing the perspective, but we're just kind of like changing and warping the tool with these little handles here that allow for us to warp and change how the image looks. So again, just another way to move around the image, but it just kind of gives you some different options in order to do the same thing. So if we'll go ahead and redo here, which is Control Z, by the way, on the keyboard, so you can undo. And if you hold down Control Shift Z, it is going to redo. So again, I can redo, undo. A really quick shortcut there that it's just really good to know inside this program. But the last one we have down here, Deform Tool, is actually really neat. If I go inside the photo, you'll know that right now we don't really have any anchor points that we can change. We do have this little thing down here at the bottom. But if I click in certain locations inside this photo, I can then grab these anchor points and warp those that I just placed inside the photo, so I can change from that perspective that I put the anchor points. So this sort of way you can warp around the photo and you can change it in different ways, but depending on where you want the warping to start from inside the photo. So that is what the last tool is going to do. The next one is called cropping, which is very useful if you have a photo and you think, oh, this cow over here on the left side, I don't really want that to be part of my composition here, so I'm just going to crop. And then it's going to crop the entire artboard. Let's do a little bit on the other side, like so. And then you can say apply. Then you can see that now the image looks like this. So essentially just kind of like cropping away. You're removing part of the image on the sides in order to change how it is an image, I guess you could say. The next tool that we're going to talk about is selection. Now I'm just going to hold down so you can see the menu here, but we have something called Object Selection, Selection Brush Tool, and Flood Selection Tool, or Flood Select Tool it's called. Now, the one that I use the most is actually Selection Brush Tool, but let's take these from the top and just kind of move down to the bottom there. So Object Selection Tool, and by the way, if you do prefer a tool over another tool, you can just sort of drag it and just move it on top, and it's just gonna move around. Actually, we have to be inside edit mode. So if you go and right click on the top bar here and you say customize toolbar, then it's going to open up a menu that allows for us to move around these tools in here. So once I go inside tools, make sure you pick that tab over there. Now I can move them around, just so you know exactly how to do that. So Object Selection Tool basically allows you to go in and it's going to analyze the photo and it's going to try and figure out what is inside this photo here. So if there's a cow, it's going to say, well, there's actually a cow over there. So if I click on it, it is now going to select that cow because it knows what is inside the photo. It is smart, so to speak. So if I want to pick the mountains here, I can just go up and highlight the mountains. I'm going to pick those, and then you can see that it selects those mountains. Now, this is a tool that is a little bit more heavy on your machine. So if you're using a not so good laptop or something to sit here and photo edit, then this tool here can do something, you know, crash your computer or whatever. So it does take a little bit more resources to use, but I'm just gonna deselect everything here. If I pick deselection brush tool, I can go inside my photo and I can resize the tool here. If I hold down Control Alt and then click with my mouse button, and then right and left is going to resize, and up and down is going to control the softness of the brush. In this case here, we don't have softness, so it's not going to do anything. But if you're using a brush, up and down controls the softness. So I'm just going to go up and down, and I can just sort of select an object in here. So as you can see, it starts selecting the cow. I can just resize the tool again, and I can start selecting the foot down here and so forth. You know, we can deselect something by holding down Alt and then clicking. Then you can see that we deselect instead. And again, if you're confused about shortcuts, you can always, when you pick a tool, go down to the very bottom here and see exactly what you can do using these shortcuts down here at the bottom. So drag to add, drag plus Alt to subtract, Control to toggle snapping to edges. So there are different things you can do here to change how the tool behaves. So again, we just select the cow here, resize the brush. And we have different tools up here. Refine is a tool that I have a couple of tutorials on. This is basically to get a better selection of edges in order to get a better selection. So if you have hair and stuff like that. And now the last tool we have in here is something called Flood Select Tool. And Flood Select Tool is one that I don't use too often because it is one of those early tools that we had back in the day that is still useful today because it has a certain way of picking things, but I've always just been a fan of the selection brush tool. But if you pick this one, you can go in and you can adjust the tolerance. So if I want to turn this up to, let's say, 72%, and I click something inside the image, it is going to pick everything that is closely related to that image or that particular thing I clicked on. So you can see now it's basically picking a lot of the image. But if I turn this one down, let's say to 2%, and I deselect everything, you kind of notice that a thing that I like to do is just picking the select thing over here, and I just click in order to deselect, but you can also just hold down Control D, and then you deselect things. So it's just a bad habit I have for many years. But if I pick this one at 2% and click on the trees, you'll notice that it is picking less. So it's not picking the entire photo because the tolerance basically has been toned down a little bit. So you can always adjust these settings here in order to select things. Like I said, I'm more of a selection brush tool because I just kind of think this one is a little bit more controllable. Going on to the next one down here, you can see that we have something that basically allows for us to select things. So we do have this rectangular Marquee tool, if that's how you say it. Basically, this goes in and allows for you to select a rectangle. So now you selected everything within this photo here. So if I take a brush and I start painting, see, this is what I talked about with the softness and the hardness. So if I turn this one up, you can see that it's only painting within the selection. So that is basically what a selection does. I can also make a circle. Fun little shortcut here. If I start making a circle, you might be thinking, well, this isn't an even circle. If I hold down Alt, you can see that it's actually doing it from... It's actually deselecting here, but if I hold down Control, you can see that now it's selecting by making a complete circle. If I hold down Shift, you can see we can add another circle. So basically, we can do a lot of things. And like I said, there's shortcuts below here, so you can just kind of take a look at them to see what exactly do they do. Now, the next couple of tools here are also pretty simple. We just basically select in a column or a row. So if I were to pick the column one, you can see that when I drag and click, it doesn't really do anything. But if I hold down Control and then click and drag to the side, you can see that now I'm picking a column. I can't do up and down, I can just do left and right. But if I pick the row one, then you can see if we can do it in a row. So basically just making different selections in different ways. Now, the bottom one, however, is a very interesting tool because this one is our free select tool. So if I do this and start drawing, you can see that now I'm basically selecting this area. But you may also notice something if you come from Photoshop, which is that we don't have this straight line selection tool, which is actually because it's built into this tool here, which is the freehand selection tool. So if I were to hold down Control, let's say I'm drawing something and I then click Control, then you'll notice that I get this line selection here. So if I were to let go of the control, you can see now I start drawing again. So this is a really cool way to just kind of draw in different ways in order to select in different ways using one particular tool. So now the next tool we have down here is something called Fill Tool. And this one you might think is the bucket tool because that is something we know from other programs. But this one is actually for filling in objects in certain ways. So if I were to click this one and just kind of zoom out here, you can see that now we don't actually have any sort of color. We can actually choose if this should be a fill or a stroke or what type should this be. This one is more interesting. So if I were to go in and pick a color, you can see that if I pick a gradient and go in and say I want to, for example, have like this, and I want to pick the other side of the gradient and it's going to be red. Then if I drag, you can see I'm now creating this gradient inside my photo. Now I'm actually drawing on top of my image, so it is actually deleting the image. This is a destructive workflow, so to speak. But essentially, this is a way for you to fill in certain objects or layers that you have selected inside your project here. Now let's go and delete the layer here and talk about the bottom one, which is Flood Fill Tool. This is the one that people may know about. So if you go in here and let's say you click on a certain color inside this image here, you would actually pick a color just so we don't have black. Let's pick red. If I were to click on, I just clicked the ground, then you can see it selects the ground. If I click on the sky, then it selects the sky. So everything that has a similar sort of color. And you may remember we had the, if you go back on the selection tools here, the flood select tool, where we went in and we clicked on something and selected something. This one does something similar. So it just kind of goes in and it picks a certain color, and then you have a tolerance up here, just like we had previously, and then it just fills in a certain area. The next one is our paintbrush tool. So if I were to go in, you can see that I can start painting. Pretty simple. And again, Control Alt and then drag left and right. It's going to resize. Up and down is the softness. So if I pick something extremely soft here, you can see it has soft edges. You go down to the bottom here, we have Paint Mixer Brush. This one is also kind of fun. So if you go in, you can start mixing certain colors. So kind of like if this is wet paint and I'm then putting, I don't know, like a pencil and I'm just like drawing across, you can see that now I'm just kind of mixing colors. Of course, right now I have red selected, so it starts with the red. So I'm mixing in red with that area. We can also just go ahead and pick white. Let's do that. And then you can see I start mixing and just kind of like mixing paint into this photo here. The next tool we have here is something called Color Replacement Brush Tool, which basically goes in and colors the background and disconcerting it with the foreground elements. And to just kind of demonstrate what I mean, I picked this green color here. And as you can see, we have this mountain in the background, and clearly this part of the mountain that I'm highlighting right now is a different part of the mountain than the part in the front here. So basically, this is another smart feature that goes in and analyzes what kind of the image is behind each other. So like distance-wise. So if I were to go in here, I can actually select for example, a green color, and I can start painting in the background over here with that particular green color. Same thing with the cow. You can just kind of see if I zoom in here that it does select layers. So you can see it kind of like draws in the highlight now. So if I draw that, you can see that only the highlights get drawn. If I go forth here, you can see that part of the shadow only gets drawn. So it kind of disconcerts the different parts of the object with each other. And this is great for, let's say, if you have lighting on your face inside a photo and the lighting is kind of a certain color, then you can go in and paint it another color and maybe add a blend mode to it to have the lighting be a little bit different with only that part that hits your face. Then we do also have this one at the bottom here, which is called Pixel Tool. Now this one, if I pick this one, you can see that now I am just kind of like drawing and you might not see exactly what is going on here. But if I zoom in, you can see that now I'm drawing in pixels. And you can always increase the size of the brush here, but you can basically see that it's trying to stick within the pixels of my drawing. So this is, for example, for people who want to do pixel art for, I don't know, a video game where you're like trying to create a pixel art game. You can zoom all the way in, and then you can just kind of like draw in pixels here. And this is a great tool because in Photoshop, you would have to go in and change your settings and do different things in order to draw pixels because, oh no, it is not really doing hard edges and stuff like that. But in here, we can just kind of do it by just simply picking the, what was it called? The pixel tool. Now, the next one at the bottom here is our brush tool. So basically a brush tool, our erase brush tool. So this is for picking a certain part of the image and just kind of erasing it. So you can also do softness here and hardness, you know, depending on how you want to erase things. Then we have the one below, which is background erase tool. So again, this one is another smart feature similar. So if we go back up here to the color replacement brush tool, but it just deletes instead. So it will actually analyze, okay, so this part of the mountain is its own thing, so we're just going to delete that in a similar way. So it analyzes the photo using, I guess, machine learning in order to figure out what part is together, and then we can just delete that. We do also have this one at the bottom here, flood erase tool. So this one basically goes in and does the exact same thing as the bucket tool. If you click somewhere, it is going to delete all the colors that are around with that similar color. So if I click here, you can see, oh, it deletes the sky because that has a similar color. And again, we can always go in here and choose the tolerance to see how much should it actually tolerate when it comes to deleting. If we go down to the next tool, we have adjustment brush tool. Now, if I go in, this one is actually super neat. If you, for example, want to add a adjustment, whether this being brightness and contrast, or hue and saturation, or exposure, or something to an image, but you only want it to be a part of the image, not the entire layer. What you can do is, let's say I want to add a little bit of, I guess, a little bit more of contrast to the ground here. So I'm just going to start drawing, and as you can see, I'm drawing. There we go. I'm just kind of painting here. And if I do that, it is now going to add, in this case, exposure, because that is what I had selected by default up here. So I can actually adjust the exposure, but only that part that I selected. So this is a really neat tool to just kind of do a small area. Again, you could just also create a adjustment layer and just, you know, erase instead if that's what you wanted to do. But this is just for like quickly selecting a certain part of an image. So if, for example, I want to increase the contrast of my cow and go to exposure here, and just say brightness and contrast. And if I just click add adjustment, it's just going to add it as a layer. So you can see that it gets added over here as a layer. But if I just kind of draw on the cow, you can see it does do something by default, but this is just so you can see exactly what it does. And then you get the options down here. So now I can adjust it. So to 0% with the brightness, and I can just sort of adjust the contrast of my cow's face, if that's what I want to do. So this is a really neat tool that I love to use. Now, the next one down here is the burn brush tool. So it basically goes in and just kind of like darkens the image. So if I start drawing, you see things get darker and darker and darker, you know, every time I click and drag. Then we do also have the dodge tool, which is the opposite. It makes things brighter. And of course, you can tweak the settings up here to change how you want them to work. And then we have the Smudge Tool over here, which basically just saturates certain areas, so changes the saturation. So if we were to click and then start dragging, you can see things get more and more saturated. We get some more color and so forth. You can also desaturate. There's a shortcut for that, but I do think we can also change it up here. Yeah, so if we go up here at the top, you can see we have saturate pick right now. You can also desaturate. If I pick that one, it's just basically going to remove color. We can also do vibrance. So if I click on that one, or if I want to do HSL, saturation, which is a different way to saturate. So you can kind of pick and choose how you want to saturate and desaturate the image, which is kind of nice. So now the next tool we have over here is something called Filter Brush Tool. Now this one does the exact same thing as when we went up inside where we have the Smudge Tool with the Adjustment Brush Tool. You remember where I started drawing in the contrast or whatever, but instead it is doing something with filters. So the exact same way, if I wanted to add blur or high pass, which is something I love to use, glitch, denoise, add noise, you know, so forth, you can go ahead and just draw that onto the image, and it's going to add that as a layer inside your layers. So for example, if I want to blur something, just kind of like draw like so. So again, you can always click this and you can adjust it. So if I want to just tone down the radius a little bit, so we have just a little bit of blur, we can just sort of drag and just change how that affects the image. Now in here we do also have different tools. So if I were to pick the next one, it is called Blur Brush Tool. This basically just does exactly what it says. It goes in and blurs the image so it's not, you know, sharp. It's basically just blurring so it looks blurred. Then we can go down and we have the opposite, which is Sharpen Brush Tool. This is great if you want to just sharpen images just a little bit. You can just kind of go on top and just sharpen a little bit. Now it's not quite obvious to tell here, but because this is a pretty high resolution image, but if I just want to sharpen things and keep doing this, keep doing this, keep doing this, hopefully you can see, oh, things get sharper. You know, it gets very sharp now. So you can basically just go in and sharpen until it looks the way you want it to. Then we do also have something called Medium Brush Tool. So this basically goes in and reduces noise. So if I have an image, now this might not be the best image. Actually, no, we do actually have some areas up here. If I zoom in, basically these things that makes you tell this is an image. You know, you can see these little dots there. Like it's not very good. So if I go in, you can just kind of like draw. You can see it kind of like takes that away. It does also kind of blur the image a little bit, but you can kind of see how it makes it blend a little bit more together with the noise, so it doesn't look as bad when you look at it. Like I said, this can also make it kind of like blur things, so you don't want to overuse this one. But basically, let's say you have a part of your face and your cheeks look very pixelated because there's a lot of noise, maybe the lighting wasn't very good. Just kind of use that to smoothen out the noise. Then we do also have the next one here, which is called Smudge Brush Tool. This basically, instead of the painting tool that we used earlier where you added a paint and then just kind of like smeared it around, this one is just for smearing around without the paint. So if we were to go in here, I can just sort of drag, and you can see, okay, this is like I'm dragging my finger through a wet canvas and basically just, you know, dragging around the colors, so to speak. Then we have something called Clone Brush Tool. I use this fairly often inside many of my Photoshop projects, or in this case, Affinity projects. Basically, you can go in and hold down Alt on your keyboard and select a certain area. Like, for example, this area up here, you can see it adds this little cross, because that's where it selected it. And then when I pick somewhere and click, let's actually resize the brush here. When I go somewhere and click, you can see that I start drawing from that perspective where I put that cross or that X or whatever you might call it. And it's just going to sort of copy whatever is there, which is really neat when you want to do background removal, like certain elements. Let's say I want to remove this this cow over here and just sort of like start doing something like this and remove the cow. Again, this is a very hard brush here, so I can just smoothen it down. Let's do something like this. Just draw it in. There we go. You can see we just kind of like remove some elements in our own way. Now, the next tool we're going to talk about is a little bit more complex, and it does sort of take looking up a tutorial or something to figure out how to use. And if you come from Affinity 2, it is also going to look just slightly different than what you're used to inside Affinity 3, or what you are about to learn inside Affinity 3. But if I were to go down and pick Undo Brush Tool, this one is a super cool, unique sort of tool that once you learn how to use it, you can create some really cool stuff with it. So if I were to go down inside my painting here, and if you were to start drawing something, it is going to just give you an error message because it says you need to pick a snapshot in order to get this working, because it's not going to paint anything unless you have a snapshot in your history that you can paint from. I can create something called a snapshot from this image. So if I go up to Window, go down to General, go down to Snapshots, you can see that we have a Snapshots panel that we can use in order to take snapshots. I'm just going to drag it out here so you can actually see it. Now, snapshots essentially allow for you to go in and say, well, okay, I'm going to take a snapshot, like I'm going to save this state that my image is in. So if I were to go up here and say I want to add a snapshot, I can call it something. I can just call it default just for now. Then I created a snapshot. And if I start making changes to the image, let's say I start painting, you know, actually let's add an adjustment instead. That might be a little bit cooler. So if I add a adjustment here, maybe I want to add a little bit of exposure. I'm going to do that. I'm going to add some exposure to my image. And now I'm done, basically. What I can do is I can add another snapshot and I can call it something like exposure. Just so I know exactly what it does. Exposure. And what I can do is I can, if I want to go back to the previous version of my image, I have it saved where I can restore. And now it looks like the first snapshot. But I can also go back to the changes I made and restore that version of my image. So basically, instead of like redoing and undoing, let's say you made a change inside your image that you're not quite sure, are you going to keep this change? Then you can create a snapshot of it, and then you can go back, and then you can try something different. Oh, actually, the first method I used was actually a little bit better. How do I restore that? Well, basically you take a snapshot and then you just go and restore that version. But that's not really the point of this tool here. So let's go ahead and add in another state. So basically I'm going to go in, I'm going to change things a little bit, maybe add a filter. That might be kind of cool. Let's add some Gaussian blur just to blur the image a little bit like so. I'm going to do that. Then I'm going to save another snapshot and just going to call this one blur like so. And now what I can do is I can actually go back to the original if that's the state I want to go back to. So I can restore this state here. So now we have the original. I can go down and I can pick the snapshot brush tool, or the, what do you call it? The undo brush tool. And I can go in and I can select one of these states over here. Now you don't just select the state. You actually do need to make sure that first of all, you toggle on this set undo brush source on the left side. So if I want to add some exposure, I can click on that one. Then I want to make sure I click on the layer that I want to change inside this particular composition here, because you can have multiple layers, and whenever you use the undo brush tool, it's only going to affect that layer that has been changed inside the different states, which is kind of cool. And what I can basically just do is say, well, the cow needs to have a little bit of exposure. I actually kind of like that in that state. So I can start drawing that in if I needed to. You know what? I do want to blur out the background. I do kind of like that from a different state I made. So I'm just going to go down and pick that one. Then I can just kind of like blur in the background because I like that from that particular state. So basically, you're undoing and redoing from different states, which is kind of cool. So in order to use this tool, you do need to have the snapshot tool. I'm just going to drag it down below here. I'm just going to restore my default state. So I'm just going to say restore snapshot. And let's go on to the next tool over here, which is called Inpainting Brush Tool. Now this one, if I go in here, let's say I have some certain area inside the photo that I think, there's like something there. I don't want to have it in there. Like maybe you have a photo of a person that has blemishes or, you know, pimples, and you want to get rid of that. You can use this brush tool here by clicking on the layer. Then we zoom in. Let's say I want to get rid of this pole over here. I'm just going to drag over it. Then it's just going to go and analyze, and then it's just going to say, okay, so it has to fit the surroundings around the selection. I'm just going to paint it in there. Now, the next one here is called Healing Brush Tool. And this one is something that you're going to think is kind of similar to the Clone Brush Tool, but is actually not. So if I were to click the Clone Brush Tool, just to kind of demonstrate the differences, if I were to, let's pick the fur here. Let's say I want to copy this part of the fur. Let's actually make sure it's a bit smaller. There we go. Let's say I want to copy that part over here. Oh, well, the colors don't really match, and that doesn't really look that good because we're copying pixel precisely from one area of the photo to another. So what I can do with this one instead, if I just undo what I just did here, is I can select this area just like with the Clone Brush tool. But when I start painting in, it's going to try as much as possible to blend the colors together. So you can see it does not have that entirely white fur that we have over here. It is trying to, as well as it can, blend in with the surrounding areas. And again, you can always tweak the settings up in the top there. So it doesn't do the exact same thing as the Clone Brush tool. This one is more for, you know, if you're not trying to exactly copy paste from another part of the image, this one will actually try to blend in with the surrounding colors. So if, for example, I had to go back to, you know, where we didn't have the pole here, I would actually probably use this tool instead of the Clone Brush tool to go in and remove, because then you might, you know, Photoshop people that can look at images to see had they been Photoshopped, you know, they'll have an easier time. Just kind of see that there is, if you can see it here, there's like a hard edge around where I tried to clone it. So using this tool here instead is a lot better when it comes to trying to remove this area, because as you can see, we don't have that hard edge because it's trying to blend it in with the surroundings. The next one we have here is something called a patch tool, if I remember correctly, patch tool. So basically this one allows you to draw in a certain area. Let's say I want to draw in this section here. Then I can just sort of drag around, say, oh, I'm going to try to get this area over here. So basically it's trying to patch in a certain area with another one, kind of similar. And if we select the next one here called Blemish Removal Tool, this one will basically remove small imperfections. This one could also be used for removing, for example, pimples. Let's say I want to remove that little black spot there. I'm just going to drag it over and just do that right there. And then you can see we remove it. So this one basically just allows for you to kind of do the same thing as our previous patch tool. But it just kind of selects it in a circle instead. So basically to allow for you to remove certain things you don't want to see inside a photo. We do also have a red eye removal tool. Now we don't have a red eye in this cow here, but if I had a red eye inside this photo, I could just sort of draw around the red part of the center of my eye that has that red shine in it that you sometimes see when people take photos, and just kind of do that and let go, and then it's going to try to remove that as best as possible. So that's these tools right here. The next one is called the pen tool. Now the pen tool basically allows for us to draw around an image, and this one is in a lot of cases better than a free selection tool. So if you want to draw around curves, you can see right now it's actually like drawing in a color, which we can do if we want to. But we can also, if I just close it off here, we can also go up and say you want to mask it or make a selection. So if I mask it, you can see now we mask that area. Or if I make a selection, I just make a selection of that area. Or I can just paint it in. So I want it to be red, have a border that is this color here, change the border size, just to make a shape, we can do that as well. But like I said, we can also make a selection like so, and just kind of do that. So this is a really good tool for just kind of selecting certain areas. Now we do also have this tool below here called the node tool. And this is to change those little areas, basically all those points that I placed using the pen tool. So if I click it here, you can see that now I can actually adjust these in different ways. I can hold down Alt to change how I modify these when I drag them. We can move them around, we can do different things here. You can also, when you have the pen tool selected, hold down Control, and then you do get the same effect here, just like that. So basically you're selecting the node tool by holding down Control, which is kind of neat. So you don't have to swap back and forth between them constantly. Then we do also have this other tool below here, which is basically just like this is the rectangle tool. This is the, I guess, the circle tool, ellipse tool. I think it's called ellipse tool. That basically just allows you to draw a shape and customize how you want that to look like. So you can change the coloring, you can change the border. You can change how the border width is. Do you want to have the corners being rounded? Then we can do that. And then we just change how much we want to do that. Basically allow you to draw in different shapes. And you can just see that we have a variety of shapes. We have a QR code that you can draw in if you want to do that. An owl, I guess. Oh, that's a cat that we can draw in. So some fun shapes too. Speech bubbles, or just circles if you want to do that. So this is basically just for drawing in shapes that you can do something with. If I were to go down to the text tool, this one is actually really cool, because in Photoshop, this works very differently. If I choose the top one, which is called Artistic Text Tool, I just had to make sure it did say artistic. What you'll notice here is when I want to draw a text, typically in Photoshop, you click and then it's just like very tiny and you have to like scale it up so it has like the size you want it to, and then you can get started on customizing the text. But here, when you drag, it allows for you to go in and basically by default go in and say, oh, it has to be that size. And then I can start, drawing some text in here. Now, Photoshop might have an equivalent to that, but this is just baked in as like the standard way to do things, which is just really neat to see. Now, the other one we have here is a frame text tool. So basically, if I have a brochure or a book that I'm trying to make and I want the text to fit in a certain square, I can draw a square here when I start drawing or writing. If I just increase the size here, you can see that when I jump down to the next line, it's just going to do that automatically because, oh, it hit the wall. So now it's going to go down to the next line there. So this is another really great text tool. And the next one we have down here is the color picker tool. Now this basically just goes in and picks a color. So you can see now select the color down here inside my colors. So I can pick green, blue, depending on what exactly I'm clicking on here, brown, and it just kind of selects the color. We do also have this tool inside our brush tool. I should probably have mentioned that when we talked about the brush tool, but basically if you hold down Alt, You can see right now nothing is actually happening, but if I click with my mouse, you can see that now I can select a color. For example, this brown is here. Then I can start drawing, hold down Alt, click. This white color or grayish color, I can then start coloring, so forth. So this is basically just to pick a certain color inside your canvas. We can also pick a style. Now this one is a little bit different. Let's say I pick a text here and I pick Arial because that is just a type of font that I can use. Let's actually make this one just over here so we can actually see it. Now let's say I choose another text, and this one is not going to be Arial. This one is going to be something a little bit more artistic. Let's say this one right here. I guess that's not clear enough. We need something that looks very unique to show this off. This one. Like these are definitely two different types of text, right? So if I were to go in here and say Style Picker Tool, I can click on this style and apply it to this style of text. So basically you take the style and copy paste it onto other text or something inside this particular composition. So you can basically just copy paste the style. And then of course you do have the view tool, which I can use to drag around. You can also just hold down space bar on your keyboard. Let's say you have this tool selected. If I hold down space, you do the exact same thing. And then we can zoom in and out, you know, click, and then you can hold down Alt, then you zoom out. You can also just Control and then zoom in and out using the mouse wheel. That's also something. And just like that, we are now through all the different tools. We made it all the way through. So this kind of just highlights for you what exactly you can do using the Pixel mode or Pixel Studio inside Affinity. So you know exactly, or not exactly, but just so you have an overview over what exactly different tools can do. But this is basically how I can use different tools in a very overview sort of sense. So not very in-depth, but just kind of like an overview over the different tools. So with that said, I hope you enjoyed, and I'll see you guys next time.